Chapter 7 of The People That Time Forgot. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ralph Snelson. The People That Time Forgot by Edgar Rice Burroughs. Chapter 7. To run up the inclined surface of the palisade and drop to the ground outside was the work of but a moment, or would have been but for Nobs. I had to put my rope about him after we reached the top, lift him over the sharpened stakes, and lower him upon the outside. To find Ajor in the unknown country to the north seemed rather hopeless, yet I could do no less than try, praying in the meanwhile that she would come through unscathed and in safety to her father. As Nobs and I swung along in the growing light of the coming day, I was impressed by the lessening numbers of savage beasts the farther north I traveled. With the decrease among the carnivora, the herbivora increased in quantity, though anywhere in Caspak they are sufficiently plentiful to furnish ample food for the meat eaters of each locality. The wild cattle, antelope, deer, and horses I passed showed changes in evolution from their cousins farther south. The kine were smaller and less shaggy, the horses larger. North of the Kro lu village I saw a small band of the latter, about the size of those of our old western plains, such as the Indians bred in former days, and to a lesser extent even now. They were fat and sleek, and I looked upon them with covetous eyes and with thoughts that any old cowpuncher may well imagine I might entertain after having hoofed it for weeks. But they were wary, scarce permitting me to approach within bow and arrow range, much less within roping distance. Yet I still had hopes which I never discarded. Twice before noon we were stalked and charged by man-eaters, but even though I was without firearms, I still had ample protection in Nobs, who evidently had learned something of Caspakian hunt rules under the tutelage of Du seen or some other Galu, and of course a great deal more by experience. He always was on the alert for dangerous foes, invariably warning me by low growls of the approach of a large carnivorous animal long before I could either see or hear it; and then when the thing appeared, he would run snapping at its heels, drawing the charge away from me until I found safety in some tree. Yet never did the wily Nobs take an unnecessary chance of a mauling. He would dart in and away so quickly that not even the lightning-like movements of the great cats could reach him. I have seen him tantalize them thus until they fairly screamed in rage. The greatest inconvenience the hunters caused me was the delay, for they have a nasty habit of keeping one treed for an hour or more if balked in their designs. But at last we came in sight of a line of cliffs running east and west across our path as far as the eye could see in either direction, and I knew that we reached the natural boundary which marks the line between the Kro lu and Galu countries. The southern face of these cliffs loomed high and forbidding, rising to an altitude of some 200 feet, sheer and precipitous, without a break that the eye could perceive. How I was to find a crossing I could not guess. Whether to search to the east toward the still loftier barrier cliffs fronting upon the ocean, or westward in the direction of the inland sea, was a question which baffled me. Were there many passes or only one? I had no way of knowing. I could but trust to chance. It never occurred to me that Nobs had made the crossing at least once, possibly a greater number of times, and that he might lead me to the pass, and so it was with no idea of assistance that I appealed to him as a man alone with a dumb brute so often does. "Nobs," I said, "how the devil are we going to cross those cliffs?" I do not say that he understood me, even though I realize that an Airedale is a mighty intelligent dog; but I do swear that he seemed to understand me, for he wheeled about, barking joyously and trotting off toward the west, and when I didn't follow him, he ran back to me barking furiously, and at last taking hold of the calf of my leg in an effort to pull me along in the direction he wished me to go. Now, as my legs were naked and Nob's jaws are much more powerful than he realizes, I gave in and followed him, for I knew that I might as well go west as east, as far as any knowledge I had of the correct direction went. We followed the base of the cliffs for a considerable distance. The ground was rolling and tree dotted and covered with grazing animals, alone, in pairs, and in herds, a motley aggregation of the modern and extinct herbivore of the world. A huge woolly mastodon stood swaying to and fro in the shade of a giant fern, a mighty bull with enormous upcurving tusks. Near him grazed an aurochs bull with a cow and a calf; close beside, a lone rhinoceros asleep in a dust hole. Deer, antelope, bison, horses, sheep, and goats were all in sight at the same time, and at a little distance a great megatherium reared up on its huge tail and massive hind feet to tear the leaves from a tall tree. The forgotten past rubbed flanks with the present, while Tom Billings, modern of the moderns, passed in the garb of pre-glacial man, and before him trotted a creature of a breed scarce 60 years old. Nobs was a parvenu, but it failed to worry him. As we neared the inland sea, we saw more flying reptiles and several great amphibians, but none of them attacked us. As we were topping a rise in the middle of the afternoon, I saw something that brought me to a sudden stop. Calling Nobs in a whisper, I cautioned him to silence, and kept him at heel while I threw myself flat and watched from behind a sheltering shrub a body of warriors approaching the cliff from the south. I could see that they were Galus, and I guessed that Du seen led them. They had taken a shorter route to the pass and so had overhauled me. I could see them plainly, for they were no great distance away, and saw with relief that Ajor was not with them. The cliffs before them were broken and ragged, those coming from the east overlapping the cliffs from the west. Into the defile formed by this overlapping the party filed. I could see them climbing upward for a few minutes, and then they disappeared from view. When the last of them had passed from sight, I rose and bent my steps in the direction of the pass, the same pass toward which Nobs had evidently been leading me. I went warily as I approached it, for fear the party might have halted to rest. If they hadn't halted, I had no fear of being discovered, for I had seen that the Galus marched without point, flankers, or rear guard. And when I reached the pass and saw a narrow one-man trail leading upward at a stiff angle, I wished that I were chief of the Galus for a few weeks. A dozen men could hold off forever in that narrow pass all the hordes which might be brought up from the south, yet there it lay entirely unguarded. The Galus might be a great people in Caspak, but they were pitifully inefficient in even the simpler forms of military tactics. I was surprised that even a man in the Stone Age should be so lacking in military perspicacity. Du seen dropped far below par in my estimation as I saw the slovenly formation of his troop as it passed through an enemy country and entered the domain of the chief against whom he had risen in revolt. But Du seen must have known Jor the chief and known that Jor would not be waiting for him at the pass. Nevertheless, he took unwarranted chances. With one squad of a home guard company I could have conquered Caspak. Nobs and I followed to the summit of the pass, and there we saw the party defiling into the Galu country, the level of which was not, on an average, over 50 feet below the summit of the cliffs and about 150 feet above the adjacent Kro-Lu domain. Immediately the landscape changed. The trees, the flowers, and the shrubs were of a hardier type, and I realized that at night the Galu blanket might be almost a necessity. Acacia and eucalyptus predominated among the trees, yet there were ash and oak and even pine and fir and hemlock. The tree life was riotous. The forests were dense and peopled by enormous trees. From the summit of the cliff I could see forests rising hundreds of feet above the level upon which I stood, and even at the distance they were from me I realized that the boles were of gigantic size. At last I had come to the Galu country. Though not conceived in Caspak, I indeed come up Korsvajo. From the beginning I had come up through the hideous horrors of the lower Caspakian spheres of evolution, and I could not but feel something of the elation and pride which had filled Tomar and So al when they realized that the call had come to them and they were about to rise from the estate of Band lus to that of Kro-Lus. I was glad that I was not Batu. But where was Ajor? Though my eyes searched the wide landscape before me, I saw nothing other than the warriors of Du seen and the beasts of the fields and the forests.